Well, thank you for your comment on the film. The 5-year period really worked out to be to our advantage. Um, we thought we'd be able to do the film in 3 years, but for a number of reasons, we had to extend the time, and ultimately it was 5 years. And it actually, as I said, it was an advantage. Let me give you a couple examples. The first is there were many people that we wanted to interview who have very tight schedules, and it would take several years to get on their calendar because they're traveling all over the world. In many cases, they're performers, and we thought they'd be adding really good value and very interesting insights to our film. So we had to wait. And our last interview, or next to our last interview, it was the day before Thanksgiving, about 3.5, almost 4 years out. With these additional interviews that we did of people, it turned out to be a very wise decision because we got greater insights into the quartet and the life they lead on stage, off stage, in their homes. It ended up, some of those interviews ended up in the final cut. So had we not gotten them, they would not be in the film. And it added a lot, as those who have seen it have responded to us about it. The second area with the extended time of filming has to do with an observation in the quartet's schedule where they're performing. They have full-time jobs in New Jersey teaching music in the music school, but then they travel the 180 days all around the world. And in the past, when we began filming them in year one, they were only going to China a couple times a year, and that was kind of the pattern. But then in about year 3.5, we began to notice that their schedule, they were going 8 or 9 times a year. And we asked them what's going on. They said, well, they were now getting bookings to perform in many of the secondary cities in China. Before that, they had always performed in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Hong Kong. The secondary cities had built these magnificent performance venues. And the Shanghai Quartet was already at the top of the list in terms of classical string music in China. So the people pardon me, who were responsible for booking, they wanted the Shanghai Quartet to come and perform in these secondary cities. Cities like Wuhan, Changsha, Xiamen, Xi'an, Tianjin. And when I say secondary, we're not talking about small towns. These are 10 to 20 million size cities. Anyway, so that became a change, and we wanted to explore it because it gave a whole new aspect to music in China. And it's particularly interesting when you look at the background, particularly during the Cultural Revolution. The music that the quartet performed was banned. You could get in big trouble. You could lose your job, be ostracized from the community, not be able to find work. And it was kind of their like blacklist without naming the people. But so that supposedly ended after the Cultural Revolution, but it still existed for a while. And so it was quite a surprise to see that Western classical music was being embraced in the secondary cities. And we captured that in our film, and we think it's a worthwhile addition to the film because the Shanghai Quartet is leading that in China right now, and have been for quite a while. So those are two good examples of what happened when our schedule got extended. There were more opportunities to add valuable insights to our film that just took longer than what our original plan was. And we're glad we got it. The film looks great because of it. Hope you enjoy it. Yes, we had a number of challenges throughout the production. I can't imagine any film project, documentary or otherwise, not having issues that pop up that are totally unexpected. So I'll give you a couple examples. The Shanghai Quartet perform all over the world in the finest music venues. Kennedy Center in Washington, Lincoln Center in New York, Carnegie Hall in New York. They're often, in fact, the last performance the quartet had this year prior to COVID, before New York closed down in March, 3 days, 4 days before that, they performed at Carnegie Hall. So we wanted to get some of that footage in these very prestigious venues. But we ran into a problem. They all have union contracts, which we could still perform, but we'd have to have some union people on our team, and there was also a cost of filming in those venues. We didn't have the budget. We just couldn't afford to do that. Having said that, we were still able to get the performance quality that we wanted in many other venues, in the U.S. and France and in Mexico. We got it. So we're able to overcome that. But it just underscored the problem of budget. Because we were didn't have a major budget, and it didn't come in right away, and we would raise money and go shoot, and we'd raise money for another trip, like in France, and we would shoot, we'd come back, raise more money, and we just move on to the different locations that we wanted to film. And ultimately, our last major trip was to China, and that was the most expensive, because that was a 2.5-week venture. We went online and with a fundraising site and with mailings and parties that friends would hold for us. So the time that it took to raise the money to do the film was a challenge, and we never really got the amount we wanted in order to do additional things. But it doesn't show up in the film that it's lacking in any way about the story and the insights of the characters, the Shanghai Quartet, and the people that are in their orbit, and the life they lead, and what audiences think. So it was a challenge, but we succeeded. A small challenge. We were using a Sony camera at 4K. And our files were huge. We were constantly buying, T drive, hard drives, 8T, 10T, because we just kept filling them up. And we didn't have that really budgeted, so that was a little bit of a strain on our budget. So those are kind of the large and small things that we had to overcome, but we were committed to getting the film done, and we found ways to overcome the challenges that we hit. So I would say that it worked out. It worked out. You just have to be committed to do those things, and ultimately you can find a way. So I think that's the best way to describe the challenges we had and what we did about it. Paid particular attention to how we navigated with the quartet in their professional life as opposed to their personal life. Those were two different important spheres that we wanted in this film, but they required different sensibilities on our part, the production team, and we approached it carefully. We thought it through before we did it. The filming of the professional part, both performance on stage, off stage, in rehearsals, most of the time tended to be a fixed camera, and we would just, flies on the wall with the camera rolling, and that was pretty easy. And there were a couple levels that we had to go through over time. While the quartet, all four of them agreed and thought this was a great idea, that we were going to shoot this film about them, but they didn't really have any sense of what it was all going to be about. They did know that it was going to not just be the professional performance life, it's going to be a broader professional life, but also a major part of the film is their personal lives. So the quartet seemed to get a comfort level with us. As I mentioned in some other scenes, it took some time to get the comfort level from when they were doing rehearsals. That important negotiation that goes on to get the music just right. But we shot a lot of other things that were in their professional life, and they just, I'd say after 5-6 months, they were very comfortable with us being around, and they were just relaxed in terms of us and the camera. In the personal lives, a little bit different, because we had new individuals that had no relationship with us. With the spouses and the kids of different ages, we had to build the trust there as well. And that was a different kind of shooting. Pretty much all of it was handheld camera in their homes, and outdoors, indoors, driving with them, going to the skating rink. So we were much more animated. The kids found it fun, particularly the young ones. They just thought it was great, and that, I think, also helped relax the spouses. But as you can see in the film, the responses that we got when we did some interviews with the wives, they seemed very comfortable. But I think it's because we paid attention to that. We were sensitive. We wanted to be able to be curious, but we didn't want to be intimidating. That was an important balance. And with each family, it was kind of, we had to feel our way out, because they were all different kinds of people. But the main thing was having that sensitivity to being in their lives, and when we're doing the personal side, and being keenly aware that we wanted them to be comfortable and didn't feel any kind of intimidation or anxiety about it. But as you see in the film, everybody's pretty straightforward in their responses, and I think we got such good responses and good reactions from the kids because we paid attention to that. We knew their professional life. It was a very different environment than their personal life. And it worked out. We think it worked out fine based on what we got and what's in the final edit of our film. So that's a good question. I was thinking about a number of different ideas for documentary films from personal experiences or things I knew about. And the one that kind of rose up the first was possibly doing a film about this classical string quartet called the Shanghai Quartet. And it started off with a personal relationship. I met Hong Gong because our wives were friends. They lived around the corner at the time. And we just became social friends. And as I got to know him better and his kind of life story coming from China, and things began to resonate. And then when he began to tell me his family history, and I met his brother Weigon, who were the two co-founders of the Shanghai Quartet, I said, there's really a story here. And it kind of resonated with me because I had worked in China, and I knew a lot about Chinese history and culture. And so I began to think about how I might approach this. And about that time, I met a director, cinematographer named Hal Rifkin, who was finishing a film on an Indian artist who lived in northern New Jersey, who I knew. And we began talking, and I told him about the idea, and he said he didn't know a thing about classical quartet string music, but neither did I at the time. We were both novices, but the story was rich. And we began talking about doing a documentary together. And we put together a proposal. We met with the quartet and told them what we wanted to do. They liked the idea, and we agreed to do it. And we had the total creative control, And essentially we're just saying, give us permission to follow you around for a while, both on stage and off stage. And that's an important distinction, because we're not looking to do just a straight performance piece, stage piece, where you see four guys either in tuxes or dressed in suits, play beautiful music, stand up and bow, and they leave. That's not what we wanted. I mean, that's part of the film, but we wanted to do a 360-degree view of their life. And that would include not only on-stage performances, but rehearsals, in-home practicing, traveling with them, filming them with their families, and filming them as they travel 180 days a year on top of full-time jobs, 180 days a year around the world to perform and teach. And and they agreed. They thought it was a great idea. But it took actually a while for them to get used to us. They were a little bit self-conscious, I would say, in the rehearsals. And the rehearsals are very important, and they're important in the film, and they're critically important for successful high-level classical string quartets. You'd say everybody needs to rehearse if they're going to perform on stage, but there's a negotiation that leads to arguments about intonation, and it took a while for them to be comfortable of us filming those. They're always very private, just the four of them hashing out how some piece of music would be interpreted and performed. So anyway, the trust level was important, and we kept filming and following them, and shot a lot with either in their homes, or in one case following them to the ice skate rink where their kids were going to be ice skating. And so the goal was to get 365 degrees and 360 degrees, and that's what we got. And it worked out well. And we didn't know the full narrative, but what we did was, after we did an initial interview with them, Hal and I, we did individual interviews, Hal and I, just talking to them, not filming, just to get kind of their history, their professional history and their personal history. And from that, we teased out about 12, 13 strands that we would look to shoot over time in these different situations. And the goal was that, once we got Tracy Kring, our editor, in, we would leave it up to her to weave the braid of these strings that we had filmed over 5 years. And that's pretty much how we viewed the project, began executing it. The only one other major part to that was the fundraising. We did not start off as fully funded. We would have to raise all the money, we'd go shoot, and so we did that multiple times. But that all actually was worked to our favor, because while it extended the time to do the film, it gave us a lot of time to observe and think about what we had, and were we on the right course that we wanted to be on. That's pretty much how the beginning of this project began. And what we did was successful in our judgment, and we hope you enjoy the film. Difficult technical problem we had in the overall production of the behind the scenes, the Shanghai Quartet documentary film, was actually planning and executing the shooting we wanted to do in China. We had saved the China shoot to last, and it was going to be a longer period of time, a little over 2 weeks in China, in 4 cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Changsha, and Wuhan. And the goal was to really capture the quartet on the move. As I mentioned earlier, they travel 180 days a year on top of full-time jobs at a state university. And we wanted to see what that was like, that 360-degree view of them, not only performing on stage, but also what life is like. And so when we were preparing to go, we knew that it would be difficult to bring in our camera equipment. And we spoke to some people in media organizations that had a lot of experience with filming in China. And We're just a small independent production group doing this. It's not like we're Disney going to China, which they get access without any issues. So we learned how to pack our equipment, and what to say to people when we got there. But also we knew that we would not be able to use our large Sony camera in a lot of places, particularly outdoors. We knew we could use it once we were at the performance venues, because we had been pre-approved to come and film the performance and backstage and anything that was going to be done on that property, those 4 properties. So that wasn't the problem. But in Beijing's an interesting city. It's one of the largest cities in China, and it's a lot more conservative than, say, Shanghai or Guangzhou. It's the capital of China. It's kind of their Washington D.C., and there's conservatism. So we anticipated we might have problems using that camera outside at different locations. And indeed, when we went to shoot in a park on a Saturday morning in Beijing, we were stopped when we had all that equipment and production people in tow, and they said we couldn't use it. So we repacked it, and we decided to figure we were there. The only other alternative was to use our smartphones. Hal had an iPhone, I had a late model Samsung Droid, and we could shoot in 4K with them, so we thought we'd probably get a reasonably good match, even though some experts said we would not get a match. But anyway, it was the only option we had, and we used our smartphones, and leaping way forward. I mean, it looked great after we filmed it on the phone, but really the editor, Tracy Kring, was the one who was going to tell us it's either usable or good or not good. And she actually loved the footage. A lot of it was our B-roll, which made it into the film, but some of them, some quick interviews where we didn't have the large camera, we used, and the smartphone. In my case, Hal had to leave early, and I became the cinematographer for a couple locations, particularly in Changsha. So anyway, so that was a technical problem we had to deal with, and it was a risk. We could have had mismatched footage that wouldn't work in the film, but it did work. And if you've seen the film, I think you'd be hard pressed to see a difference on which one is large, a large professional Sony or a smartphone. And so we overcame it. But when you do a documentary film, particularly on low budgets, you got to be prepared pretty much to these kinds of situations and just bounce. And so it worked in this case. The Shanghai Quartet travels 180 days a year away from home. We felt it was important to get a sense of what the impact was on the families with their husbands gone for half a year every year, and that's been going on for some 35 years. So we interviewed wives, and 2 of the wives we learned are classical musicians themselves. Sophia, who's married to Nick, the cellist, is a classically trained flutist, and she also plays piano. And she was performing before she met Nick. Yan Yu is Hong Kong's wife, and she's a Juilliard graduate in violin, and very, very talented. Both of them are very talented. But Yen also had to kind of put her career on the shelf because they all had families, small kids, and pursuing a career in performance music certainly wouldn't fit when your spouse is not around. So we were interested in getting the sense of the impact of that 180 days on the families, and in particular the wives who are classically trained musicians. And we're very fortunate that we thought of that, because they added a tremendous amount of dimension to the film and to the impact of their husband's professional career on them. And in the film, you'll see, their levels of acceptance and how they manage things when the husbands are away. And we think that adds a texture to the film that wouldn't have been there had we only focused on the key characters, the four musicians. The wives bring a lot dimension to that, and we're very happy that we did that. That adds a lot to the film.